So locally, our students have to learn both our national languages, which is Maltese and English, besides another 1 or 2 foreign languages later on in their senior years. First, why learn a second language or a third in that case? And what are the benefits? And why is it more difficult to acquire a second or third language later on in life?
Well, first of all, when you learn another language, you learn the culture of that language as well. So it helps you to understand different cultures. For example, when I lived in France for a while, I didn't know French when I arrived. I knew a little bit, but I had to learn it because the French speak French. And so I had to learn French in order to communicate with them. They don't like speaking other languages except French. And that was good for me because it forced me to learn the language, but I also learned the culture. Why do they say things a certain way? Why do they behave a certain way when they say something? So you begin to understand other cultures. And when you begin to understand other cultures, you have a greater empathy for them. Too often, people don't like other people from different places because they don't understand their culture. They don't understand why people say, well, the French are very rude. No, that's the way they behave with each other. I mean, that's not rude to them. That's the way they interact. Exactly. It seems rude to us because they're not behaving the way we behave, but it's a different culture. So learning another language always helps you to understand the culture from which that language comes, and therefore a greater understanding that people can behave in different ways and still be perfectly acceptable human beings. Now, the 2 parts of the brain responsible for learning language are an area discovered by a French physician, Paul Broca, which is right behind your left temple, called Broca's area. And that was in the 1870s. And in the 1880s, a German physician by the name of Wernicke discovered this part of the brain right back here behind your left ear was responsible for language as well. Over time, we realized Broca's area, vocabulary, syntax, and grammar of language. Wernicke's area, sense and meaning of language. And these are very, very active from birth. And as I said earlier, by about 8 months of age, they're already working hard, separating language sounds, the phonemes of your language or multiple languages from the background noise. And you can teach 2 languages. In fact, you can teach 3 languages simultaneously at the young age. And the brain is in those areas are very capable of sorting it out because each language has its own sounds, its own series of sounds, its own consonants and vowels, its own peculiarity of structure that separates it from the next language. And the brain's able to do that. Now, because these spoken language areas are active very young, and they were formed when we were a young species, they close off around the age of 6 or 7 years of age, depending on the student, on the person. Because at that time, it was the brain assumed that we knew all the language we needed to know to survive. So what happens then if I want to learn French, I want to learn Maltese and English? You learn them at the same time. What if I want to learn French? The sooner you learn it, the better. Because if you can get it in the same, while Broca and Wernicke are still active, it's easier. But what happens is after about 10 to 12 years of age, those areas, Broca and Wernicke no longer respond to a foreign language sound.
In fact, our students, Maltese students, start learning a third language when they're 11, 12 years of age.
Yeah, and it's going to be more difficult for 2 reasons. Number one, Broca and Wernicke aren't participating very much at this point. Number 2, you know your native languages so well that you get what we call negative transfer. In other words, the native languages begin to interfere with the acquisition of new language. In other words, you may say, when you acquire a word in French, oh, that's not the way we say it in English, and not the way we say it in Maltese. Why do they say it that way? In other words, you get interference And when you get interference, it makes it more difficult
More difficult, that's it.
to learn. I think of the French word librairie. Now, to an English person, librairie sounds like library. And then you say to them, by the way, librairie is where you find books. Aha, then it must be a library. But it isn't. A librairie is a bookstore. The French word for library is bibliothèque. So there's an example of how English, in that case, is interfering with the acquisition of a French word.
French.
Yeah, because the English is so well established, we begin to measure everything against our native languages. The sooner you can acquire that third language, the better. And by the way, we have research that shows us, and I wrote a book on how the ELL brain learns. ELL, English Language Learner brain learns. And the research we found there shows that people who know 2 languages makes it easier for the brain to learn a third. So if you have to learn 2 languages at a very young age, you're at an advantage in Malta than a country where they learn only 1 language.
One language.
So
That's
learning
good
a third
news.
language is easier if you know 2 languages already.
That's good news for us, yeah.
Yes, it is good news.
So
I should say something else about creativity, by the way, because not only are kids more eager to do things that are creative, but what do the creative arts do? They improve memory. They improve your, how do they do that? Well, think of being in a play. You have to memorize the lines of a play. Think of being in dance. You have to memorize the moves. Being in ballet, when you throw that ballerina up in the air, you better be in the right place to catch her, or there'll be a disaster. Think of learning a musical instrument. After a while, you memorize the notes and you can play from memory. So that's one good thing. It improves memory. It also improves persistence. If you make a mistake, you try again. You make a mistake in a line in drama, you learn it all over again. You say it again. You make a mistake playing a musical instrument like a violin, piano, you stick with it. You learn it again. So persistence is very, very important skill in learning, because it means you don't give up the first time you have a problem. And that's another problem with these things, is that kids have losing the ability to be persistent, because if they don't like it, they just move on to something else. Also focus, attention. Attention is very critical to learning. And think about the focus you need to have to play a musical instrument correctly. Think of the focus you need to have in order to learn the lines of a play. Think of the focus you have to have in order to create a beautiful piece of visual art, or to dance.
To remember the choreography, the steps after each other.
Exactly. So those are very important reasons why creative arts are helpful, because they translate into helping to learn everything in school, no matter what you were exposed to. Every teacher should be thankful that kids are being creative, because it will help them learn whatever they teach.
Okay, so higher order thinking increases understanding and retention. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Again, higher order thinking means taking a piece of learning and really delving into it. I think, for example, one of the things we talk about, the different kinds of governmental forms: democracy, oligarchy, monarchy, autocracy. What do they all mean? If you just say, well, democracy means this, and autocracy means that, monarchy means that, oligarchy means that, okay, fine. I'm going to give you a test on it. You pass the test, let's move on. There's no deep thinking about how they're different and how fragile they can be, how they can change. How does a democracy become an autocracy, and vice versa? So higher order thinking means the ability to look deeply into what you're learning, to see connections, to compare it to things you already know. And when you do that, you do two critical things. Erica, if there's anything a teacher gets out of this presentation, it's this. Whenever I ask teachers, how long do you want your students to remember what you taught them? What do you think they say?
For always.
Exactly. Forever. For always.
Forever.
Exactly.
For always.
I've asked this all over Europe. I've asked this all over the United States.
And the answer is always the same. Forever. For always.
Yeah, no matter where I go, Singapore, Bangkok, no matter where I go, Washington, no matter where, the answer is always the same. Forever. Well, in order for that to happen, when you teach something, the brain has to make a decision at the end of the learning episode. At the end of the time you're saying, okay, we're done here. The brain has to decide, do I keep this? Do I throw it away? And it makes that decision, we believe, basically on two criteria. And they're explained in that book. Number one, the brain asks itself, does this learning make sense? Does it fit in with what I know about how the world works? That's where the transfer comes. Because if it fits into what I've already learned, to what I know about how the world works, then it makes sense. And the kid says, oh, I understand. Oh, I get it. But the second criterion is even more important. And that is, what's it got to do with me? And there's the second one, meaning, relevancy.
Yes, meaning, that's it.
Yeah, if I don't see the meaning of it, well, it makes sense, but so what? That's the so what question.
Mm-hmm.
And you know you've got problems with meaning when the student says, why do I have to learn this? Or will this be on the test? They're telling you they don't find meaning in it except to hold it in working memory long enough to take the test. And when I take the test, out it goes. That's why every teacher on this planet has had the experience of saying to students, remember a couple of months ago when we talked about this or talked about that? And they go, oh, I remember that. It's because they held it in temporary memory long enough to take the test. And after they take the test, they get rid of it. You can't recall what your brain doesn't possess. Right. And that's why they say, no, I don't remember that. And the teacher thinks they're going crazy. I know I taught it. I know I taught it. I know I tested it. They did pretty well on it. What happened?
In fact, we get teachers from the year after, scholastic year after, teaching a new concept, building on what they've learned the year before, and go, you should have learned this last year. Didn't you learn this? And the students go, no, I haven't done this. But they would have done it.
Of course, you know? Yeah, they never saved it for the long haul. That's why. So it's really important to make connections with past learning. Anytime you can say to the students, by the way, you already know something about this, or you already have a skill like this, then, oh, really? The brain says, really? What is it? So you've got their attention, you got their focus.